Hello. Welcome to Filled with Possibility, Poetry, a program in the all-virtual 2021 Virginia Festival of the Book. I'm Jane Kulo, Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't read today's books, we hope you will. For details about how to buy them from our local bookseller, UVA Bookstore, please visit vabook.org, where you can also explore our full schedule and watch past events. While you're there, please consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. Now I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Erica Meitner, author of 5 collections of poems, is a professor of English at Virginia Tech. Her most recent collection, Holy Moly, Carry Me, was the winner of the 2018 National Jewish Book Award and a finalist for the Library of Virginia Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award in Poetry. Kiki Petrosino is the author of White Blood, A Lyric of Virginia, recently awarded the 2021 Rilke Prize, and 3 other books of poetry. Her awards include a Pushcart Prize and a Fellowship in Literature from the National Endowment for the Arts. She is a professor of poetry at UVA. Brian Teare is the author of 6 critically acclaimed books, most recently Doomstead Days, winner of the 4 Quartets Prize, and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle, Kingsley Tufts, and Lambda Literary Awards. A 2020 Guggenheim Fellow, he's an associate professor of poetry at UVA. And our moderator, Kevin McFadden, is the author of the poetry collection Hardscrabble and the chapbook City of Dante, a collaboration with illustrator Jeff Pike. He is a letterpress printer and chief operating officer at Virginia Humanities. Last year, these poets were selected to have letterpress broadsides made of their work that are included in an exhibition set called Voiceovers, work that confronts racism, sexism, and bias in our experienced environments. The full set of Voiceovers broadsides will be displayed in venues throughout Virginia when possible. As they read these particular poems, we'll also display the broadsides. Welcome everyone, and Erica, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Kevin. I'm so excited to be here reading with Kiki and Brian and to be reading for Virginia Festival of the Book. I'm going to read some poems from my book, Holy Moly, Carry Me. This is a book about raising 1 white son and 1 Black son in the 21st century Appalachian South. I live in Blacksburg, Virginia. And I wrote this poem right before the 2016 election. Jackhammering limestone. You ask about the leaves, and I tell you, it's been so dry here. The leaves are just giving up, turning brown, falling off the trees, which all look dead. This might be a metaphor for the election, or might be a metaphor for nothing. It's hard to say. Each morning, I wake up to machines across the street, jackhammering limestone, shearing away more rock face, and turning it to rubble strewn across red clay soil, so dry it heaves and cracks. It's been 7 weeks of drilling and blasting, and that's not a metaphor for anything either, except maybe my midlife crisis, which I'm having surely, as there's whiskey next to me, and I'm up all night wondering if I can be hairless again in some risque places. Most days I refuse to believe we're doomed, despite growing evidence to the contrary. I mean, it's like the 1970s down there, trust me. Most days I listen to NPR on my car radio and talk to one son or the other in the back seat and ask them questions they sometimes answer as we drive home past the pile of rubble and the leafless trees, which vaguely resemble the girl I saw on campus, wearing an entire shaggy outfit made from flesh-colored plastic grocery bags, campaigning on an environmental platform for student council president. Her amazing bag suit was rustling in the breeze, and it looked like she might take flight, just soar over campus with the drones delivering burritos this week as a test stunt, because our motto here is invent the future, which I think about a lot, not as your future in the sense of what I wanted to be when I grew up, which I figured out by process of elimination was not a banker or a computer programmer, and I never saw myself as a mother either, but here I am. More like I would invent a future where my Black son will not get shot by police for playing in a park or driving or walking from his broken down car. I would invent a future where there is always enough chalk to leave notes for the next class. We are starting a revolution somehow, instructions to follow. What no one told me about programming computers for Merrill Lynch to keep their front-end trading systems running past Y2K was that I was simply a dominatrix of code. The disaster that would take our building down came later and had nothing to do with language. My cashier at Kroger has an epigraph on her name badge under Paula that says, "I will make things right." I hope that girl wins her election. I hope that someday someone else will enter my hairless palace and find it marvelous. The photos of broken glass, the piles of rubble. The future is throttling towards us, and it's loud and reckless. My next poem is actually a basketball poem, and it is about the time the Cleveland Cavaliers won the 2016 NBA championships. It begins at an artist colony, and I think the only thing you need to know here is that the older Pulitzer Prize winning poet Stephen Dunn has a cameo in my poem. Too strong is what the announcer dubs Steph Curry's flub shot that bounces diagonally off the backboard. This is game 7 of the NBA Finals, and Cleveland goes on to defeat the Golden State Warriors, but we don't know this yet because we're still watching the game jammed into an alcove where it's live streaming from someone's laptop onto a wall at an artist's colony, since a surprising number of writers and composers and painters are basketball fans. So when the sportscaster reels out descriptions of plays, Nate the jazz critic says, someone should write a poem called Too Strong, and Stephen Dunn isn't interested, though he's sitting behind me also rooting for the Cavs, saying things like, my goodness, and he's the best closer for his size. You have to give context in your poem, mansplains Nate, who points out that Too Strong is a hypermasculine way of saying Curry basically just fucked up the shot. It's important to note here that Cleveland hasn't won a championship in any sport since 1964. That's a 52-year curse, in case you're anti-math. I am well versed in the sadness of Cleveland. Skies hanging like lead most of the year, husks of buildings, smokestacks pumping raw flame over downtown. My husband grew up in the sadness of Cleveland, and we return there every Christmas to more unemployment, more foreclosure, more poverty, more shitty weather. When LeBron left Northeast Ohio, my husband actually burned his replica jersey in the yard, wouldn't mention his name for 3 long years of anger and mourning. He uses Cleveland sports teams to teach our sons about failure and perseverance, with a heavy emphasis on the failure. But here's LeBron on screen, lugging his city's championship dreams like a bag of rocks. Forget Tamir Rice, age 12, gunned down by police for being Black, for playing with a toy gun in a park, left to bleed out on a sidewalk. Forget that Cleveland is the poorest city in America other than Detroit. LeBron stuffed this game with thunderous dunks, fadeaway jumpers, and blocked shots, towing his teammates along in his ferocious wake. And when LeBron goes down in the final minute of the game, writhes on the court in pain after landing on his wrist, we all want him to get up. Even the artists rooting for Golden State. Get up, LeBron. Nothing comes easy to Cleveland. The next morning's paper sports a photo of LeBron embracing power forward Kevin Love next to headlines about Venezuelan food riots, triple-digit temperatures in the West, vigils for victims of the Orlando massacre, and the Colorado woman who fought off a mountain lion attacking her 5-year-old son, literally reached into the animal's mouth and wrested his head from its jaws. Too strong. In the belly of fear and rust and shame, there is no such thing. To pry open something with your bare hands, look into the gaping maw of the beast that eats your sons, the lion, the bullets, the streets, racist cops, heroin, despair, whatever is most predatory, and say enough. We will triumph, motherfuckers. At the game's end, LeBron and the Cavs coach, Tyronn Lue, sobbed without shame. I've always been tough and never cried, Lue said. And LeBron at the post-game mic, wearing a cut-down net like a necklace, says, I came back to bring a championship to our city, to a place we've never been. We've got to get back to Cleveland. We're going home. I'm gonna read a new poem. That's one of the poems I wrote this summer during the pandemic. And I think the only thing you need to know is that Helene Cixous, who's a French writer and philosopher, makes a cameo in here, and this takes place on the beach. Assembled audience. This morning on the beach, there's a small nurse shark, whiskered and flipped on the sand, and right past its shined white underbelly, a man, dissipated, ponytailed, leathery, filming his younger blonde girlfriend with his phone. She's wearing a tiny print bikini, the kind that's nearly a thong, cheeky, and is literally shaking her ass. When she stops, he says, "Did we get it?" And she must have nodded no, because he says, "Oh, fuck, let's do it again. I know what I gotta do." Helene Cixous said to be human, we need to experience the end of the world. And do you agree with her right now in this particular moment? There's a tropical storm throttling towards us, and everyone is out on the sand before the cone of uncertainty sidles its way up the eastern seaboard. Even a bridal party in blush-colored gowns, even a family reunion in matched t-shirts. So many things remain uncertain. I keep thinking of what my friend Emily, who chained herself to a bulldozer to protest the Mountain Valley Pipeline, told me. Pipeline fighters never ask, "How are you?" They simply say, "It's good to see you." It's good to see you, random strangers on the beach. I've been in my house for months. You under your striped umbrellas. You smoking weed in the surf. You fishing from the shore. You head down, searching for washed up shark teeth in the shell hash. Your radios and coolers and sun hats. I know what I gotta do. Buy bottled water. Safeguard the soul's passage. Check the flashlight batteries. Map a topography of displacement and exile. Remain untouched. The hollow space of the body. The nothing of my mouth covered by a mask. Cixous also said, my body knows unheard of songs, laments, to use a gesture to communicate something. The same crowd never gathers twice. A dead fish can symbolize an uneasiness in your body, someone who is unresponsive, a portent of bad things to come. It can mean you're next on the hit list, an occupation of loss. And my final poem is one that I'm really excited is included in the Voiceovers Broadside project. And the title of this poem comes from Native American visual artist Sky Hopinka. I'll remember you as you were, not as what you'll become. If you are fearful, America, I can tell you I am too. I worry about my body, the way lately it marches itself over curbs and barriers, lingers in the streets as a form of resistance. The streets belong to no one and everyone and are a guide for motion, but we are so numerous, there is no pavement left on which to release our bodies, like a river spilling over a dam. So instead, my body thrums next to yours in place. When we stop traffic or hold hands to form a human chain, we become a neon open sign singing into the night, miles from home, when the only home left is memory, your body, my body, our scars, the dark punctuated with the dying light of stars. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Very powerful reading. Next up, we'll have Kiki.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the Virginia Festival of the Book. Thank you, Kevin, and Jane for all of those intros. It's an honor to be here and to share poems. I am going to start by reading the poem that is part of the VoiceOver Broadside series. This poem is called Essay in Architecture, and it comes from my book, White Blood, A Lyric of Virginia. The title, Essay in Architecture, comes from Thomas Jefferson's own writings, in which he described his home at Monticello as his essay in architecture. The human face, its pine doors painted like mahogany, human face with horses under each veranda, perfect parquet tetragons of the human face still legible in Old French, sealed closet of the human face lit by oculus, design face, tinker face, factory face, twine and bare wood comprising a pulley system for the human face, woodworked face with sunbeams settling in. Revolving buffet supporting the human face, entire pewter plate collection in the face, human face as soup tureen, as paint chip, as spit jack, smoke rings textured like the human face cured, human face pickled, human face brushed with olive oil, anchovies, and Parmesan, green floor of the dome room just above the human face, floating view of the face, its quarter farms, rough cabins dotting the sloped face, partly visible, human face built to resemble a great clock, great pendulum drawing faces in the air. The next poem is called Terrorum, and it's also about thinking about Monticello. Every night, I go back to Mr. Jefferson's place, searching still his kitchens behind staircases in a patch of shade somewhere, beside his joinery and within his small ice house, till I get down that pit lined with straw where Jefferson once stacked frozen slabs of river water until summer. Then visitors would come to him to ask about a peculiar green star or help him open up his maps. They'd kneel together on the floor among his books, lavish hunks of ice melting like the preserved tears of some antique mammal who must have wept to leave Albemarle, just as I wept when I landed in Milan for the first time, stone city where Mr. Jefferson began to learn the science of ice houses, how you dig into the dark flank of the land, how you seal the cavity. Leave open just one small hatch through which I might lift through gratings Mr. Jefferson's cold-dressed victuals, his expensive butter and salads, the sealed jars sweating clear gems of condensation, white blood appearing from warm air as if air could break and slough, revealing the curved arc of our shared Milan. There, I wore silver rings on each thumb. I studied and spoke in fine houses of ice. I knew a kind of crying which sealed me to such realms for good. Old magic weep, old throb in throat, how much of my fondness for any place is water, stilled and bound to darkness. The next section that I'll read from is from the county right next door to Albemarle County. You know, Albemarle County is where Charlottesville is. That's where Monticello is. It's where I'm broadcasting from. But we're going to move next door to Louisa County, another county in central Virginia, where my ancestors were part of the free and enslaved communities. In Louisa, you wake up because you hear someone singing, "Little lamb, little lamb," as if the singer were calling from across a great distance. You know, as you've always known, that you're the little lamb in this song, just as you know that no matter how far you may wander from the loop of sand where you were born, the singer of this particular song will always sing "little lamb," meaning you, quite distinctly. As you slowly climb from the covers, you try to tell the song to stop that noise, please. But what comes out is "play it again," which you hadn't meant to say at all. Soon the song starts up once more, spinning the long journey of itself. It speaks of coiling into thickets of sharp weeds, of slanting across hills. The sun even describes you in some time before remembrance. You wore a suit of woven water and learned to speak in rippling syllables. You, or someone like you. Message from the Free Smiths of Louisa County. You want to know who owned us and where, but when you type, your searches return no results. Bondage was grown folks' business, then old folks. We saw no reason to hum old master's name to our grandchildren or point out his overgrown gates, but you want to know who owned us and where we got free. You keep typing our names into oblongs of digital white. You plant a Unicode tree and climb up into grown folks' business. You know old folks don't want you rummaging here, so you pile sweet jam in your prettiest dish. You light candles and pray, tell me who owned you and where I might find your graves. Little child, we're at rest in the acres we purchased. Those days of bondage were old folks' business. The grown folks buried us deep. Only a few of our names survive. We left you this, sudden glints in the grass. The rest is grown folks' business, we say, yet you keep asking who owned us. Louisa County Patrol Claims, 1770 to 1863. I pry open the files, still packed with liquor and strange brine. Midnight seeps from the cracks, slow pulp of arithmetic. 4 or 5 or 6 at a time, the white men draw along the Gordonsville Road on foot or on horseback, clustered close. Each man counting up his hours, the knife of each man's tongue at the hinge of his own mouth. For 93 years, and every time I slip away to read, those white men line the roadway, secreting themselves in the night air, feeding and breathing in their private column. Why, belly up to their pay stubs, scraping my teeth on the chipped flat of each page. This dim drink only blights me, but I do it. Two more poems. This one is also from the Louisa County section of White Blood, and it's based on a letter that I found preserved in the National Archive. Mrs. A.T. Goodwin's letter to the Provost Marshal, 1866. You asked why I raised my hand to that boy, why I gave him some raps over the head. You ask why I took my small riding whip to his shoulders, his head. Why, you ask, when he would not cut logs at the woodpile. You ask why I took him by the hand and gave him some raps, when not one stick did he cut from 12 to 4. I told his mother, my milker washer. I told her in plain words he must do better. I told her all this without any improvement. She was insolent, which is why my son struck her. He only struck her when she ran from her cabin to pluck up the boy while I was giving him some raps over the head and shoulders with just my small riding whip. Understand, sir, this boy had not cut more than 2 scant handfuls of wood for my cook stove, but all the family were engaged to me. His mother, the boy to bring my horses to water, to cut wood. Only yesterday he said, I shall not cut a stick of wood. I shall not touch it. So these are the Negroes we have raised, never abused a single one, always had the kindest feelings so long as their conduct were tolerable, so long as I did not have to stand by my wood pile, smelling the wood pile, the smell of the sap intolerable from 12 to 4, the heave and snap of the clear sap inside the logs, never holding still, so that I had rather stand in the house, my hands sifting flour across a board, so that in truth I had much rather be still, holding nothing but my riding whip, dark and folded up small. The last poem is a poem that I wrote the fall before I left Kentucky, where I was living before I came here to Charlottesville. And is a poem I wrote for the city of Louisville after an incident of racially motivated violence in the city. A white supremacist opened fire inside a Kroger grocery store, and 2 elder African Americans were killed in that incident. Psalm. Dear Lord, dear high remembrancer, dear providential love, have mercy. Have mercy, thou surveyor of wildflowers, assessor of royal and exquisite bee realms. Have mercy, ledger, who tracks us in the night, who measures without speaking our dark trespasses. For nothing here survives, not the gold-legged deer browsing the bleached office park at dawn, nor the minute finch on her branch of long division, but thou absorb it all. O gazer, be kind in thy absorbing calculus. Won't be long before thy reckoning curve arrives at the junction of our error. How, beneath thy mineral eye, we walk abroad, forgetting thee, cartographer of sparrows.
Thank you, Kiki. The one drawback of Zoom in a reading is you can't hear the that so often is part of us when we're reading together. So thank you, Kiki and Erica for those moments. And more ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Kevin. And it's such an honor to be here with Kiki and Erica. And I just want to thank you and Jane and everyone at Virginia Festival for the Book for making a gathering possible during this time when we can't really gather. I mean, some of us, unfortunately, have gathered and will continue to in Texas, apparently. But since most of us are being sensible, I appreciate this gathering. I am going to read 4 poems, and the first 3 are from a book that came out in 2013 called Companion Grasses. And these 3 poems are part of a sonnet sequence called Transcendental Grammar Crown. I'm actually going to read them backwards, so sort of against the crown form. And a lot of my work is really interested in our human capacity for reflexive thought and abstraction, and how those things result in a kind of idealism that fails us when it meets material and social reality, and in all sorts of ways it fails, but also a real pleasure in the material, despite the way our thinking often fails when it hits material reality. These 3 poems are written in proximity to a field. that I really loved. This is called Otherwise, Grass's Parable. To have been built bent to bear witness, to have been thin-stemmed, spined like a mind, to have said, it's true, we saw the grasses turned snake, flesh, fall crept cribs of cryptic ribs. We wished it was a dream, but the fields went weird and left. Was it a dream? At forest's edge, we watched dark arc over the fields, how trees begin to lean at that hour over their own shadows, and the voice called the grasses back by name. Timothy, bent, orchard, hair, poverty, sweet vernal, come. Fail better. Solstice brings the field to its knees. Yarrow, flax, vetch, heavy estival air, a gull of pollen. And aren't you novice again in lit Euclidean guilt, shadows to true each natural fact toward more radical matter, a robe of rhetoric, auric eulalia, to angled praise, fodder the color of how you felt as a child, pure Bible light, ochre smoke and ivory vellum pages, cut stems sweet, taller now than grass. You can't but muster nothing, longing, a rope you'd use to haul it all otherwise. And then this is the poem that's the broadside of feeling. Sonnet. No monument, no moment, no human passion. Just spider's fiber, cantilevered thing, hedged, best guess, a net to register the transparency identity becomes its minimal matter, fragile. And then what? Plaint and wait, as if your whole life a pattern of spectacular aptitude for disappointment, your intelligence a broken wing, a bird feigns to distract the hunt from kill. It's useless to reduce gesture further. Dear form, are you reason? Are you even feeling? Fail better. And then this last poem is an attempt to fail better, as opposed to feel better. So it is called Olivine Quartz Granite Carnelian, and it takes place in Johnson, Vermont, in the hills above that town. On foot under thunder, heading in from the west, I wasn't thinking rain, but now I am thinking rain on Plot Road while I watch Foot Brook do its thaw thing. Ropey, cold, clear water pulls itself downhill fast, its spatter lathering granite banks with foam. Uphill, up the road, a field mown gold. Its curve is cut by horizon, a veil of rain drawn across it slowly so it darkens in increments. I left the house without poncho or umbrella. I'm cold. The good news is the way Archimedes wanted a place to stand to lift the world, and Descartes sought one thought as certain as the point a lever turns into a fulcrum. This dirt road is a fine place to get totally soaked in the poem. The bad news is El Nino. It's a bummer to go all cogito here after the hottest winter in the hottest year so far on record, all the thaw finished by the first week of March. Yet I can feel the color the poem gathers inside me, brown, silver interior of a dried milkweed pod, everything outside it on a spectrum of wet and getting wetter as the front moves overhead. A little mist sizzles high in the canopy, its sound in the middle distance of the sonic landscape between Footbrook and Thunder, a distance rusty blackbirds also fill from the oak they have flocked to, so raucously dominating its crown. When the rain hits, they fall silent. Then there's nothing in the hush but thunder and water on water and water hitting wood. Above the sky, a kind of crushed lilac. Around me, Clay Hill, an issue of trickles, gathering gravity, gathering mass, heading south downhill to the river. Little streams even in the mud under my feet. I want to say I feel the pull on all my vertebrae, occiput to sacrum, the water in my bones longing to join the thaw. And thought, alluvial too, the way valleys fill slowly with gravel sent down by the surrounding mountains, olivine, quartz, granite, carnelian, each stone an idea washed, then carried by rain. Down Footbrook's leaf-slick steep bank I slide, the way walk and watch begin in rhyme, then fail, the way those same activities fit inside each other until they don't. I slip, hit rock, my body stops, the walk stalls, and I sit, my mind rising toward quiet as the brook goes by southwest. I watch, let the current take over. Over its rocky bed, the water runs clear, leaves the distortions made by its torsion flickering, the way musculature moves its skin, all flexure and shadow. Do not move, the X-ray tech told me, so I stood and did what I'm doing now. I watched, living turned to image, a bruised sort of bluish fluid on a white screen the rheumatologist lit up. You might have years of mobility left if you're careful, he said. I could have looked like that for hours at my spine, the molecules locked in, degrading matrices. Where the joints meet up, spurs curve small bone hooks honed to catch on flesh, the x-rays see through, causing the doc to write in his report, soft tissues unremarkable. It's weird to be always incurring off-screen injuries I have to live with. The process makes a space in my thought, like I make a space on the brook's hard bank. Anthropogenic non-point source pollutant, my urine, a potent effluent of medicines I need and pesticides I don't, a pharmacopoeia of harm for riverine species. I close my eyes. Rain on leaf litter sounds like storm wind high above, and the brook thrown downhill by its own force, the world coalescing briefly in an unending rhyme with itself, consonant and comforting. I know it's cogito that makes it seem my ears make it so. I open my eyes. I get up and go east, back up Plot Road, muddy now with runoff. Off-road, landscape ranges from field to forest to dwelling and back, the visual rhythm of settlement and regrowth, clear-cutting and aftermath. My eye always drawn to ecotone, richly liminal and ugly, where forest meets field grown over stumps. I love what yields green there, then dries and thickets. Bull, thistle, milkweed, seed heads in hundreds that luster against the denser screen of trees. I love how birds the size of sparrows hunt in the scrub, break cover to duck between thin trunks, the black-capped chickadee loosing its slow two-note, sing-song, sing-song, only after it lands a branch. Some things must be listened into appearances. The thistles, for instance, rustle, sigh into sight, that ecstatic in wave patterns that predict wind that hits my face. The rain insinuates itself slowly into puddles of an abalone, silver, iridescent as a rock pigeon's neck. And the poem starts first as a color I hear, its stiff, dry stalks shaking gray and brown. It's almost pornographic. Detail the world offers, texture whose totality is far beyond capture, adequate capture, and excites me anyway, as endless as the filaments of beard lichen, the same soft, bright green of olivine. So I watch, I walk on, I fill my pockets full of milkweed pods, a few still stuffed with floss. I watch as if I could forget the harm that happens where the world's flesh meets my flesh. I walk as if I could undo the human self I've become and remain through undoing done to others. Between walking and watching, the whole world slips, goes missing, my mind empty as the chambers of a gun whose bullets have hit the intended targets, residual heat and soft black powder, all that cogito leaves behind. I never meant to fire. It's not my voice that cries out, bullseye, but I find my mouth moves too without thinking as each species goes down. And then I do nothing but think, for instance, of a cave in upstate New York. There, a fungus introduced from Europe infected bats whose skin spread through touch, a syndrome inducing the inability to hibernate. Awake, sick bats use up winter fat stores and starve, thinned wings torn, riddled with lesions. As hibernacula emptied in the east, spores moved mortality cross country to 33 states in the mere decade since the fungus first jumped the Atlantic on some spelunkers' boots, perhaps, or on infected gear. Extinction follows us, whether we mean it to or not. We are the point the lever turns into a fulcrum. By wounding the world, we lift ourselves up. So I walk the way enthusiasm means. I'm possessed by some God. I don't know how to know what I know, except to put it on foot, gesture as outwardly useless as boots in a downpour on a scale this total. Just before Plot Road meets Clay Hill, an abandoned barn leans over a stream that cuts under its right back corner, its skewed floor strewn still with tools and hay. A few license plates hang on its aged gray facade. I like the look of it, the way I like the sound of the passing cars harped on Clay Hill by frost heaves that rattle their chassis. Laughable enchantment, the sort of ruin that seems livable until it isn't. Thank you.
And thank you, Brian. Great reading. And now I hope we will have a great discussion. So I'll invite everyone to kind of come back, re-video, and we'll gather here. Take a breath. I was struck in these poems at how time bends and morphs, and how you each orient us to time. Erica, in the game that you're describing, an event that already happened, but you're moving in and out through a larger context. And Kiki, obviously the context of Virginia's history with inequality and violence on race. permeates the poems. And Brian, cogito, you're calling it, and I'm hearing in that this thinking mind, this self that abstracts, as you started with in those poems that you read from Companion Grasses. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more from each of you, if you wouldn't mind exploring that aspect of time, transhistorical, or how it moves and speeds up and slows down for you, and what kind of responsibilities maybe you feel as a director of that flow of time. Yeah, any part of that you want to grab? Kiki, will you start?
Yeah, I think I can grab onto that. Very astute observation, Kevin. And I think that my relationship to time in the poems that I read for today goes all the way back to how I think that lyric poetry operates in general, which is, I believe that the lyric poem is, it preserves the movement of mind of the poet across the subject matter. So the poems that I find most interesting to read and the poems that I aspire to write are not poems that already know what they think or already know what they're going to say about the subject matter, but rather poems that use the space of the poem to think through a problem. And in that way, we may approach poetry with the same urgency that we may approach philosophy or divinity or any other area of humanistic inquiry. Poetry is a place to think about problems. And in so doing, time passes. And the poem then, the completed poem, is the artifact or the trace of the time that the poet spent thinking through those complexities. So when you are talking about history, there's historical time, which has already passed, but that time becomes more kinetic in the space of the poem because my thought about that problem takes time, exists in real time. And so the poem is a place where you may time travel, you know, and then the reader reading the poem gets to travel along with the poet as well.
Can I add two things to Kiki's thoughts? Because that was so beautifully said. I work in narrative more often than lyric. And I think one of the really fascinating things to me that kind of blew my mind in writing Too Strong was my partner would sit and watch the recording of the Cavs game after they had won and still be so nervous because he had been so traumatized as a Cleveland sports fan that they would lose, even though he had already seen that particular narrative happen. That I think narrative can kind of create that same space in some way. You know, and I use the term trauma loosely here for that experience, but I think, you know, it's that old saying by, I think, Einstein of like, you know, repeating the same action and expecting a different outcome. One thing narratives can do, particularly if they're jammed up against each other in new ways, is create a new outcome, is create a new story. And while it doesn't necessarily move time forward, it gives us new meanings for past, present, and future in, I think, a similar way to lyric, or can. I think the really other interesting thing to me is that we're always experiencing past, present, and future in some ways simultaneously. Our brains are always moving and living in those moments in really simultaneous ways. When I walk down a street in New York City that I walked down as a child, even if different stores are on both sides of me, I'm experiencing the street in the moment. I'm experiencing the sense memories from when I was a kid. And I'm also often thinking about what's going to happen next. And so I think those aren't things that are separate to me, and poetry allows me to experience that clash or that melange of past, present, and future all at once.
And I love both of those answers. And I wanted to add something, which is, you know, when I started working on Companion Grasses and really thinking about a history of environmental writing and what it might mean to kind of join that history or be in dialogue with that history, I read a really wonderful book by the writer Rebecca Solnit called Savage Dreams, which is this history, it's multiple histories of the West, in part like nuclear testing in Nevada, and then also water in Northern California and Yosemite. But one of the things that this idea that's pretty simple, but I think was really helpful to me, was that we never look at landscape with fresh eyes. We're always, because landscape is already a cultural idea, it's already sort of a kind of palimpsest of quotations and inheritances, and that we cannot look at anything actually, but the natural world, you know, other bodies, they're always this kind of melange of received ideas. And so one of the things that is important to me in my own writing, thinking about the past inhabiting the present, is bringing forward some of the ways in which some of those thinkers or some of those ideas that shape our perception and experience of the present tense, because those also determine how the future, as we know now from the environmental crisis, the global environmental crisis, we know that that actually will shape our future. We know that also in terms of racial justice, in terms of gender justice, like these ideas from the past actually have determined both our own healthcare, our own safety in the present, the way public spaces are experienced, and will continue to do so unless we examine those ideas and change the way that they shape our material realities. And so I do see that work of kind of bringing forward and examining our inherited ideas, and making ourselves responsible for them and how they get deployed both in our own work, but also in social space. And a crucial thing that an otherwise sort of like rarefied habit of quotation that we inherit from modernism, let's say, it can actually be utilized differently now, I think, in ways that are much more critically reflective and justice oriented, for lack of a better word. So I think of that as, I think sometimes of quotation as this portal, both into the past and into the future. Yeah.
That's great. And maybe even building on that in a sense, across the books, as I was reading in these poems, presences that really are asking for a poem to be written, either quite literally, or that is the feeling that a presence that the poet's encountering is feeling and experiencing, and it is pushing. So could each of you speak to that a little bit? Have you felt those times, and maybe how does it feel when you are called, you are asked to write?
Kiki, do you want to begin again?
Yeah, so if I think I understand you right, it's about subject matter. Like, what do we feel called to write about, and when do we feel called to write about those things? With regard to my latest book, which is all about, well, it begins with my own connections to Virginia. I had never really written in a formalized way about the time I spent at the University of Virginia as an undergraduate. It was an intense time and a wonderful time of learning. It was also a time that was full of change for me. My parents separated and then divorced during the time that I was an undergraduate. And my grandfather took his own life during the time that I was an undergraduate. So in writing about my experience of Virginia, all these other things came up that had been a part of my experience for 20 years, but that I had never told anyone really in words or expressed through my poetry. And when I think about the book and how it grew, I think that it's a book that I could only write now after having lived those 20 years and having gone back into time to recollect what it was like to be a student here. in doing that, I also needed to engage with ancestral connections to Virginia that I always knew about, but that as a young person, I didn't explore fully and didn't have a catalyst to explore fully until my grandmother, who was from Virginia, until she passed away in 2015. At that point, I realized that if I wanted to know more about my grandmother than what she had told me herself, that I would have to research it and I would have to find out what the connections were and the depth of those connections. So those, paths of inquiry entwined themselves and began to feel like a calling, began to feel like work that I needed to do, that needed to be combined into one project. And I don't think I would have been ready before now to have engaged those questions. So I think that things may always be inside you that could be potential subjects for poems, but there are some poems that you need to be in the right place in your life to begin writing.
I would definitely agree with Kiki 100% on all of this. I started Holy Moly Carry Me the day of the Newtown school shootings. And I arrived at Virginia Tech in 2007, the fall after the mass shooting here. And one of the things I never thought I'd be writing about before I got here was gun culture and gun violence. And a lot of the book deals with that element of living here in Appalachia. And I think it took a moment where the age of the children who are being gunned down in Newtown were the same age as my children. And that was something that felt like it forced me to enter that conversation in a really palpable way. And there were all these other really dire things going on that are still going on: the immigration debate, the election protests, unarmed Black people getting gunned down by police. And all of those things had personal connections to me, but I wasn't able to really process a lot of it before the moment where Newtown kind of spurred me into starting to write it. So I think sometimes they're catalytic events too that push you to the moment of, I'm going to write about this. I think one of the things I was hoping while I was writing this book that it would become obsolete before it was published. And that just didn't happen. The Orlando shootings happened right as I was finishing it up, and there had been like a lull. And gun violence is something obviously that keeps happening when you write about systemic issues like racism, like violence, like environmental crisis. There are issues that unfortunately keep happening, and how we choose to address them as artists, I think we all, the three of us, work through them really differently, but all through, to some extent, our personal connections, experience, and observations.
I love that. I love the way the three of us are working that way in these kind of parallel tracks, because I think all three of us maybe also begin on some level with a somatic knowledge that eventually needs to, at whatever point, like either through research or through, a kind of chance conjunction of historical events, like gets catalyzed into poetry and into music and into narrative. And I think for me, writing Doomstead Days started when I still lived in California, and there was an oil spill. A tanker, the Costco Busan, grazed the Bay Bridge and then leaked, I forget how many thousands of gallons, 47 or something thousand gallons, 58,000 gallons of fuel into the bay. And I had actually never lived, even though I grew up in the Exxon Valdez spill, with, y'all remember it, like it was a thing in the childhood, and we all remember like Dawn Dishope's Save the Day. And I had that as intellectual knowledge, but I had never been near an oil spill. And I had never seen oiled water in person. And I had also never visited a marine animal rescue center and actually watched the birds get scrubbed down with Dawn dish soap and little tiny toothbrushes. And it was actually watching a cormorant, an oiled cormorant, kind of thrash in the hands of one of the people who were trying to help it, that was the trigger for the book. That was the moment where like all of the intellectual knowledge I had about environmental catastrophe and crisis, and all of the reading I had done in the history, in the various environmental histories and natural history and environmental writing, it all sort of coalesced into finally like a crystal of like experience and of somatic bodily knowing that made me actually, it hooked my body into my conscience, and the two fused, and I was like, okay, now I hear the call. And I know this in a way that I am beholden to, and that I will never not be beholden to again. And so for me, the rest of the book, that is in the first poem in the book, and the rest of the book, even though I moved from California to Philly, like I read Philly through that lens of being beholden to this larger network of creatures, and how we're sort of all kind of deeply enmeshed in the oil industry in various ways. So for me, not unlike for y'all, there's always an experiential moment that calls like my knowing into a more forceful relation to the poem, and that demands to be spoken. And I think of it as conscience. Like there's two. I mean, it's also music, and it's also, you know, feeling. It's all those things. But there's a core of conscience now for me that's part of that calling.
It's amazing this far into this incredible reading and set of questions. Conscience didn't come up earlier, because that's a great tie here. You have all been wonderful. I thank you for taking us into these places, sometimes difficult, certainly complex, and being so thoughtful stewards with that attention. I think the festival has granted us a wish for this excellent work, and that is knowing we have been so relatively restricted in our movements. You're going to get to wish you were anywhere. If you could travel after this reading, boom, in your minds, you were there. Where might it be? Just a quick, maybe what and where and why. Rapid fire. Let's reverse it. How about you first, Brian?
I would be on Hawk Mountain in central Pennsylvania during the fall raptor migration, being part of the raptor count, watching all of the different species of raptors make their way southwest down the Appalachians. It's just one of the most beautiful, kind of incredible experiences. And then also it's very social, like you're there with all the scientists doing the counts, and it's kind of like a tailgate party, but for birds.
How about you, Kiki?
I would be home in my mother's house. That's what I wish for. It's been more than a year since I've seen her, and she's gotten her first vaccination. And so I have high hopes that my wish will come true, that we'll all be vaccinated soon, and that I'll be able to go and enjoy being with family again.
And I haven't been alone for about a year, because I've been in my house with my children and my family. So I would love to take myself to New York City and check myself into a hotel for a night by myself, and go to the Whitney and the revamped MoMA and hang out with the art, and then have dinner with my parents, who I also haven't seen in over a year. So yeah, I would love to do all those things someday.
That would be great. And it is my wish that they all come true before too long. Thank you all again. Thank you, Erica, Kiki, Brian. I'd also like to thank the two amazing artists, Mike Powers and Liz Ferris, who had a role in the amazing broadsides we saw, and the folks at the Virginia Center for the Book, the artists who helped making it. Thanks to everyone who's watching, and please consider, these are great company while we are relatively restricted. These books, consider buying them from your local independent bookseller or using the link to VA bookstore provided on vabook.org. You can also check out other events for the all virtual 2021 Virginia Festival of the Book at vabook.org. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.